My name is Paul Leslie Hummel, P-A-U-L, Paul Leslie, L-E-S-L-I-E, Hummel, H-U-M-M-E-L, and I was born on June 2nd, 1928,
Where were you born?
Cedar Rapids, Iowa.
Could you spell it?
C-E-D-A-R,
C-E.
D-A-R, cedar, like the tree, rapids, like in the stream, R-A-P-I-D-S, I guess, Cedar Rapids, Iowa, I-O-W-A.
Mm-hmm.
I was born there on June 2nd, 1928, and lived there about 6 months, so I don't recall those times, but I spent my early years from my memory until December 1940 on a farm in Dixon, Illinois. And then after high school there, went into the Air Force.
When were you graduating high school?
High school, June of 1946.
And tell me about other school that you went through, elementary and middle.
Well, I went to my first 6.5 years in Lisbon, Iowa, in elementary school, and that was good. I was a slow learner, so I had spent 2 years in third grade, but after that I took off and did very well. And so then, tragedy in my home, my father died when I was 11 years old, and in that period of time we moved to the farm. So it was very traumatic for me to lose all my friends and go into a whole new world. And so my mother put me into a city school there in Dixon, South Dixon, to the city school, and I was suffering from my loss of my father and my move and everything else. So I was very unhappy for that period of time.
What's the name of high school did you graduate?
Dixon High School.
Dixon.
Yeah. That was like going away to college because my 7th and 8th grade were in country school, Preston Country School, south of my farm there. A little school with a teacher and about 6 students, I think. All 8 grades, but we didn't have students in all grades. So it was like tutoring. So we'd go up to the desk, interview the teacher, or she'd interview us, get our new assignment, go back to our desk and do it, and then she'd take another student up. So
One school?
Preston.
One room school, right?
One room school.
Yeah.
Called country school in those days, and I had a cousin that taught in country school, and she had like 30 or more students in her school, so he had a big job. But in my school, I had like tutoring, some of the best education I got in my life.
Because it's one-to-one.
One-to-one.
Mm-hmm.
It was tutoring. That's what it was. So when I graduated there, I had good grades, did well. But when I went to high school, it was like going away to college because this big school with hundreds of students from all over the whole area came there. Just one high school for the whole area. And so when I went there, I just didn't know how I stacked up against the city boys and girls. But I did very well there. I graduated in the top 10% of my class. And I got good grades in math and science. And I was focusing on those things, studied English and history and, the whole bit. And so when I graduated from high school, that was right at the end of World War II. And so I wasn't sure I wanted to be a farmer. And so I went off to the University of Illinois, and Urbana, Illinois. And that was in the fall of 46, I guess. So I was there 1 year. And I chose chemical engineering because I enjoyed chemistry and so forth. But going to school there, a huge crowd of veterans, and it was really pandemonium, lots of turmoil all over the place. And again, I was kind of felt like I was a little bit out of place and apprehensive about a lot of things. So I decided to terminate my college career at that point, went back to the farm.
Did you know anything about Korea when you were in school, before you graduated high school?
Very little. After I came to Hawaii, I learned a lot because a lot of Koreans came over here before the Korean War.
Right, 1905. That's the first year Korean emigrated into Hawaii.
Okay.
But did you know anything about Korea? About the time that you graduated high school?
Very little.
Very little?
Yeah.
Anything you knew? Tell me about it.
I can't remember what I knew about Korea at that time. I knew where it was on the map, but as far as the history of, like when I graduated from high school, I didn't have much interest in history. My interest developed over the succeeding years after that.
Got it. So you joined the Air Force May of 1949.
Right.
And so you enlisted, right?
Yes.
Tell me about the day that you enlisted and where you did it and where did you go to get the basic training and so on.
Well, I did it, I guess, at Dixon, Illinois. I forget exactly how the recruiting thing went, but I got accepted. And so I went by train then down to Waco, Texas, and went into flight training. And of course, they started out with boot camp, just like any other private or any other officer candidate school. So it was about six weeks or more of marching around and taking commands and all that kind of stuff. Then we went into flight training, and the flight training in basic training in Waco, Texas, was that half the day, morning, would be like ground school, to learn all the theory of this, that, and the other thing. The other half day was flight training, be out in the line and fly the plane. And so that,
when was it?
That was May of 49 for 6 months until whatever it was, October or something like that.
Why did you enlist to the Air Force, and is that different that you enlist to the Air Force as a just soldier and as a pilot? What kind of differences is there? How do you enlist to that?
Well, I've always had interest in flying. In high school, I'd read these books about the flying tigers in China, Claire Chenault and his flying tigers, and Scott or somebody, he wrote God is my co-pilot. I'd read these books about pilots and flying and fighter planes and so forth. So I was very intrigued. I'd have visions of myself being a fighter pilot. I became one. So I had interest in these things. And I thought, well, learn to be a pilot, that might have some career implications afterwards. And I could have went that route. I had friends that went to school with in pilot training. They went out of the Air Force, they went into pilot training, became Pan Am pilots, all kinds of commercial pilots. I didn't go that route. But anyway, that opened up a new career opportunity because after high school, I was going into chemical engineering, and then I held off on that. And so then after 4 years in the Air Force, I decided I didn't want to make destruction and killing my career. I want to do something constructive with my life. So then I went into engineering, which we can cover later.
So tell me about the pilot training. How was it?
Very, very rigorous. In fact, there was a
There
time...
was it in Waco, Texas,
Oh,
too?
yeah, because down there I had instructor pilots. This was at the end of World War II, and they were cutting down the Air Force. Some of them lost their jobs, got thrown out of the Air Force, or were threatened. So they weren't all that anxious to train new people to take over their job. So there was a time there when I was just barely hanging on by the skin of my teeth that wasn't going to be thrown out, because a lot of people failed out of flight training for one reason or another. And part of my reason was that I'd get one instructor and they'd be gone, and the next instructor would come in. So it took me a little while to get solo status, because it kept changing instructors all the time. Finally, I passed my flight training and could land a plane, take off, and fly. So things went pretty well after that.
What aircraft did you train?
That was called the AT-6.
86?
No, AT-6.
AT-6.
A is advanced T trainer. Advanced trainer, that was the plane that World War II pilots flew in their last period of training. They had primary trainer, basic trainer, and advanced trainer. So at that point in time, they kept changing the flight training program. So we started right off in the advanced trainer, AT-6.
How many hours of training?
I guess it's around 230 hours. I forget exactly, but by the time I left basic training, I could fly that plane like nobody's business. I could do acrobats, all kinds of things. I could put it into a spin, take it out again, fly formation, fly instruments, fly cross country. And so we went to Williams, same airplane, more advanced training, all kinds of things. So I flew that plane most of the time at Williams advanced training. And then I flew the F-80 at Williams for about 35 hours.
Williams where?
That's just outside of Phoenix, Arizona, a little town called Chandler. And it's now a suburb of Phoenix, I understand, but it was a little town of its own. And Williams Air Force Base was just outside the edge of town. Well, when I graduated, the Korean War hadn't started. I
Right.
graduated in May. It started in June of 50. And went to Bergstrom Air Force Base, Austin, Texas, 27th Strategic Fighter Wing, 522nd Squadron. And the word comes out that way because later on we were attached to the Tactical Air Command. But strategic was their whole mission was escort missions for the big bombers in Europe. And so the Bomber Command, SAC, Curtis LeMay, had his own fighters to escort him. So we had top-notch fighter pilots in our unit.
Mm-hmm.
And they were flying the F-82, which is a prop plane. The nickname is Twin Mustang
Mm-hmm.
because the silhouette looks like a Mustang.
I know.
You know the F-82?
Yeah.
Oh, good.
What was your rank?
Well, graduated second lieutenant.
Second lieutenant.
I was second lieutenant all the way until I got into Korea. They gave me battlefield promotion to first lieutenant. But after I came back out, they reverted me back to second lieutenant. Then later on, I was promoted to first lieutenant.
But tell me about the aircraft that you were flying, because to the audience, how do you bomb and how many people in there, and tell me about that.
Well, I flew the F-84E, and that was the current advanced model for the F-80. That was built by Republic Aviation. It was a straight wing aircraft with a nose intake and flow goes out the tail. And we had 6 50 caliber machine guns, 4 in the nose and 2 in the wing roots. And then we had bomb racks right underneath there on the wingtips. We had big tanks for extra fuel, which you usually always carried, because even in combat, if you had to, you'd jettison those so you can get more maneuverability. But we never did because we didn't need to. So we always carried those wing tanks to give us fuel for longer range. And then later on, we had some long-range missions. We'd carry fuel tanks on the bomb racks too. So on the bomb racks, we could carry 500-pound bombs. We could carry clusters of 5-inch rockets. We could carry napalm.
How many pilots? 2?
One.
What, just one?
Oh yeah, we did everything. We did the navigation, we did the fighting, we did the flying, the whole thing.
Were you good at shooting?
Oh yeah.
Were you
But-
were you Top Gun?
Well, I don't know. We can talk about that a little bit.
Were there kinds of word Top Gun at the time too?
I think that terminology came later on. I'm not
Later
sure.
on, right?
Yeah. Yeah, because they had advanced training in California someplace where they got this title for Top Gun, that kind of stuff. But I think I was excellent. But the thing is this, that at the time I graduated, which was 12 months, later on they went to 18 months pilot training, because then they got weapon training. When I graduated, no weapon training, just piloting.
Oh.
They expected you to learn that when you got to your unit. And so I went on some missions in Texas there where we did a few things, nothing much, because in 1 month we were over. Well, in 1 month we were transitioned into, they had the F-82, so it took a little time to transition into jet fighters, the F-84. I'd already had jet time before any of them did, but not much. So they were all good pilots. So anyway, our first mission from Texas was to fly a whole wing, 75 aircraft, 25 aircraft per squadron, 3 squadrons, to Europe, because they didn't have F-84s over there. So we flew from Texas up to Maine, up to Labrador, up to Greenland, up to Iceland, up to Europe, because in those days, no in-flight refueling. And so we did that, came back, got a new complement of aircraft, did the same thing again.
What was your mission? Just flying over to Europe?
Just take the planes over, come back on cargo planes,
Oh, okay.
and then go back again, then come back. So then after we came back the second time, then we got our assignment to go to Korea. So we flew our aircraft out to California, and at that time, they loaded the aircraft on the baby aircraft carriers from World War II. The whole deck was full of planes. Rather than disassemble them, reassemble them, put the whole plane on there, tie them down, and go. So we left, I think, oh, I forget now, maybe October of 50, something like that. But we were out in the ocean, Thanksgiving, I think it was.
What
Like,
aircraft carrier were you in?
I don't know, I can't remember the name.
Valley George or?
Well, I can't remember. It was a small baby aircraft carrier. I can't remember the name of it. So anyway, we're out in the middle of the ocean when the Chinese came in. Because while we were out there was when MacArthur and his troops landed at Incheon, and the whole war looked like it was over. We thought, well, it's over before we even get there, because they were going full speed north and trapped all the North Koreans in the south, and so it looked like it was all done until the Chinese came in. So by the time we landed over there, the Chinese were coming full speed. So we landed there. I hadn't even fired the gun yet. We took off, and our planes were ready. We went up on a gunnery range above Tokyo someplace.
What do you mean landed where?
It was a big port outside of Tokyo.
Sasebo?
Probably.
Yeah.
I don't know. I can't remember exactly anymore.
So when did you land in Japan?
That would be December of 50. So we flew a couple of missions there to get us accustomed to shooting at targets on the ground, firing our weapons. While I was going across the ocean, I studied my flight manual for that aircraft intensively. I knew where all the switches were for all the guns, for every operational thing there was. So I intensely knew my airplane by that time. And so then after a couple of missions there, then we were assigned to Daegu,
K2.
Yeah, K2, Daegu. We were assigned their Pierce Plank runway. And we had all kinds of planes there, F-51s, we had F-80s, and we had the F-84. We'd take off there on our missions, and we'd line up like a big commercial airport, one after another, and take off, and then come back. And our plane was a little bit more long range than the others. So after a while, they sent our group back to Itazuki Air Force Base, Kyushu.
So before, when did you arrive in Daegu? Do you remember? Was it 51?
No, it'd be December of 50. Because we
Still?
were flying missions already in December.
Okay.
We landed in December, and we were over there within a few days.
How
Yeah.
much were you paid when you were as a pilot in the United States?
I can't remember.
How approximately?
Well, for me, out of high school and other jobs, it was good money, but nothing like they're talking about today. I can't remember the numbers.
More than 100?
More than 100, oh yeah.
More than 100 you paid. When you were in the United States as a pilot, before
Well, in
you
pilot training, it was 75.
75.
After I graduated as a second lieutenant and pilot, it must have been 250 or 300. I forget. I can't remember the numbers.
Very good. And had you imagined ever that you're going to be in Korea and fighting?
Had no idea.
No idea.
No, because when I graduated from flight school, there was no war yet.
And what did you think about that you were in the war?
Well, my thought there was that,
Country you didn't know before,
yeah.
and you are there and fighting.
Well, my attitude there was my whole philosophy through my whole life being a Christian is you don't kill, and on and on and on. But I had to resolve that in my mind because my mission was to perform my duties, because in doing that, I protected my fellow combat personnel on the ground and others in the air from being damaged or killed. So my whole mission in my mind was to protect myself and those around me. And the enemy, well, they're in there, and it's my job to kill them if I can, because in doing so, it protects my country, protects my fellow combat people, and protects all of us. So it's us against them.
Right. How was Daegu Air Base at the time?
Where?
Daegu. K2.
Well, at that time, that was winter time. It was cold. We had a little tent. There was about 6 of us in there on cots, sleeping bags. It had a wooden floor, and the wood went up around the edges about 3 feet or so. and a tent over that. We had a little pot-bellied stove in the middle of the place there, so they'd keep a little bit of heat there. So we slept good. We slept warm, comfortable. The soldiers weren't shooting at us. But they were not far away. They were up there in the hills, still a few remnants around, guerrillas still fighting. And so there was still action in the
Yep.
area. We were there for at least 2 or 3 months. Well,
So
130 combat missions. And usually they considered 100 missions was the combat duty at that time. But our unit went over as a unit. We left all of our equipment there, and pilots from the mainland were coming over to replace us and take over our equipment and keep the thing going. Well, they were late in getting there.
So will you still belong to 27th Strategic Fighter Wing
The whole time,
the whole time?
yeah.
What was your mission? What was you supposed to do there in K2?
Well, our initial mission was to protect the bombers, because that's our calling, Strategic Air Force.
But the bombers were from Japan, right?
Yeah, oh
Okinawa.
yeah. There's B-29s, B-50s, whatever it was.
So how do they meet you guys together in the air?
Oh
or-
yeah, in the air.
Tell me about those.
Well, we'd be assigned a mission, and we'd go up and meet with them sometime before they got up to the combat area. And they were in the 30 to 35,000 foot altitude range, somewhere in there. And we were up above them about 2,000 feet, doing a pattern there to protect them against the enemy. The enemy was the MiG-15 at that time. And so when they'd go up to North Korea, almost every time we'd meet the MiGs up there in the air. Now, they were probably Russian pilots, maybe Chinese, maybe some North Koreans. We don't know exactly. But they all came from Russia, because they were producing that MiG-15. Chinese, I don't think, had the capability of manufacturing fighters at that time. I'm not sure of that. But they may have had pilots that were trained. We're not sure of that. But they were good pilots.
So you ended up in dogfighting?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Tell me about it. Any
Well-
occasion where that you have?
Well, see, I was new in the wing, so we fly as a flight of 4. This pattern was developed during World War II tactics, that 2 planes always stayed together. The flight leader and the wingman, the element leader, number 3 man, and number 4 man flew as you flew 2, always, no matter what. So when we engaged the enemy fighters, the element leader was the flight leader or the element leader. Their job is to look ahead and try to get the enemy. My job as a wingman was to stay in formation no matter where they went, and be looking behind to protect his tail so he didn't have to look back there. So I'm looking up here, looking back there, and flying all over the sky. But I was real proud of myself, because I never lost my flight leader. I was always with him, and he was real happy for that. During some of our early missions, some of the element leaders lost their wingmen because going all over the sky. But by lost, I mean they got separated. So anyway, we engaged the MiGs there, maybe a half a dozen times. Not very long, not very often. But there were times when the MiGs would come down at us, and you'd see the tracers coming past, and say, "Brake, turn hard this way." So I never got hit by the MiGs, my own plane, and my flight leader never did either. But some of our planes got shot up pretty badly, and they came home to survive and fly again. But I don't recall that any of our aircraft were, at that time, lost to the MiG fighters, because they came in fast, and we thought we could turn inside of them, because they had swept wing, we had straight wing, we thought we could turn inside of them. Later on, when they captured MiGs and flew them, we realized that if they'd slowed down, they could have stayed right with us. But they came down, shot at us, and took off. And so we only did that a few times, but then later on they realized that our straight wing couldn't fly like the swept wing.
Mm-hmm.
So later on they developed the tactic of coming right through our formation, going down, hitting the bombers and going down. We'd try to chase them, and we had a Mach limitation, 0.82. So we go down, the plane starts shaking. If we keep pursuing them, the wings would fall off.
Mm.
So we had to back off. So we were totally ineffective at that time when the MiGs left us in the dust and went down and hit the bombers. So then the bombers went to night raids, so we were done with that. So our whole wing was then transferred to the 5th Air Force Tactical Air Command. So then we flew like all other tactical fighters. So it was ground support, interdiction, you name it, the whole bit. So most of our missions were that.
At the time, the U.S. soldiers were withdrawing
Oh
from
yeah,
North Korea.
full time,
Yeah.
trying to get the heck out of there. They had a hard time.
Any of your mission was regard to the chosen few?
We were up in that area. I can't remember all the geographic locations, but we were up there all over North Korea. I knew North Korea like the back of my hand. You'd get down there and we knew where we were. We didn't have all the sophisticated navigation stuff they have nowadays, but we knew the geography of the area very well. I can't remember all the towns and locations, but
Any battle that you remember that the Air Force, U.S. Air Force, was helping and supporting the withdrawal of the U.S. forces?
yeah, well, we did a lot of that all over the place, but was it Hummel? The big one?
Hummel, yeah.
We were flying close support in that area. That was later on when all of our troops were trying to get the heck out of there, and we were trying to protect them and not damage our own people and try to intersect the enemy there. But we had missions way up above, and we had always a secondary mission. If we couldn't find enemy directly, we had alternative mission was titled armed interdiction. We'd scout the area to find targets of opportunity and hit them. And so we had complete control of the air, our Air Force, Navy, and all the rest during the whole period of time.
Right.
Because the MiGs were there to cause trouble, but they couldn't dominate. They couldn't hurt. Their Air Force, I don't think, ever hit our forces on the ground. Not that I'm aware of.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that helped a tremendous amount right there. So we did our best. But, you know, when you're up in the air, you can't see exactly what's there. You have to be careful you don't hit with friendly fire your own people. So we tried our best on that. But we had an excellent technique for frontline support. They had what they called mosquito pilots. Have you heard of that term?
Yeah.
So we worked with them. They had the AT-6, Air Force pilot up front, Army radio man in the back. The Army radio man knew what was going on the ground.
Yeah.
And he could talk to the pilot. The pilot would be back here, come down his AT-6, shoot a 2-inch smoke rocket down. It would hit a puff of white smoke. Okay, your target's so many yards this way or that way from the puff. So we'd dive down. We'd hit them with whatever we had. When we first went in there, you'd make pass after pass till all your munitions were gone, all your machine guns, everything was gone. By the time we left there in June of 50, you made one pass and you got out of there because their anti-aircraft fire really improved tremendously over those few months.
I see. Can you describe the first moment, occasion where you faced the MiG-15? And do you remember that moment? And can you describe your feeling, emotion? Were you scared?
Not really, because the adrenaline was there, and I had tremendous confidence in my own flying ability, that I could do anything that was required. And I had less fear in my mind fighting the MiGs because I could see everything than when I was on ground targets. The guns are down there any place shooting at me, you know. So I couldn't see where the enemy was or who was shooting at me. So I had much more confidence flying up in the sky than I did on ground support. After the Korean War, I came back and then I went to school here. I joined the Hawaii Air National Guard and we flew F-86s. Some of them still had emblems on from Korea. So I've spent 3 years there while I was going to engineering school. I flew, you know, like the Air National Guard, 2 weeks full-time in the summer and then weekends from time to time. And we'd go out and shoot targets. And I had some of the best scores on the targets you shoot at. So I felt I was very, very top-notch.
How many pilots were in K2 when you were there?
How many pilots?
Yeah.
Oh, I can't imagine. Because they had F-51s, F-80s, and we had F-84s. So we had 3 squadrons, and each squadron...
One squadron, how many pilots?
Well, we had about 25. We had 25 aircraft, but not every aircraft was flying every day because of maintenance and that sort of thing.
Oh, so one squadron has a 25
aircraft and 25 people, pilots.
So
more or less, I'm not sure.
More than 25, because the pilot has to be always, you know, rotate, right?
Not really. I mean...
so if you have a 25 aircraft, then there are 25 or more pilots.
No, the thing there is that 25 aircraft were not all functional every day.
Right.
So we had between a half and 2/3 or 3/4 that were functional at any one time. And so there were many, many days I'd fly 2 missions in one day. You'd fly one in the morning, one in the afternoon.
Wow, must be very hard.
Oh, it was very intense.
How many squadron in K2 at the time?
How many squadrons? I really don't know because
Okay.
they had 3 different groups of aircraft.
Right.
And if there were 3 different wings and 75 each, well, then you multiply it out. So you'd have 450 or so. So
Were you able to write letter back to your family?
oh yeah.
How often did you do it?
Oh, not every day, but as frequently as I could. But at that time, I was not married. That came later. So I write home to my family in Illinois, mostly to my mother. And I give credit for surviving that whole thing to my mother's prayers. She kept me alive.
Did you? Yeah. Also, did you send some money back to your family?
Not really, because they had enough money, and what little money I had, whatever it was, went into savings. And so when I left the Air Force, I had what I consider to be a significant amount by that time. But I was very frugal my whole life. I was raised in the Depression years, and I squeezed every penny. So
Exactly. Depression really was a big
1930s.
impact.
But I lived in a small, that's regressing now. I lived in a small town in Iowa, and we had a home. We had a warm bed to sleep in. We had food to eat, and my father and mother knew how to survive a big garden and a few cows and pigs and chickens and stuff. So we had food to eat. A lot of people were starving, but I was very blessed my whole life.
Very good. Tell me about the life there at the Daegu. What did you do?
Well, nothing much but fly. I didn't go into town.
You didn't
I-
go?
No, because we were at the air base there and we were flying all the time. Okay, so it was mostly get up and eat and sleep and fly. That's about what I did there at Daegu.
You were not curious about the Korean society, Korean people?
Well, I didn't have time to really think a lot about it. And at that time, a lot of Korea was pretty well devastated from the war, from the North Koreans coming down and South Koreans trying to survive. And, the city of Seoul was pretty much in ruins. We flew over it a number of times, and it looked like it's mostly ruins at that time. So it's amazing how it's developed over these years.
Yeah. How was food and life there?
It was fine. We had good food to eat at the air base. They gave us what we wanted. We had like a buffet. We could choose what we wanted to eat.
Wow.
It was fine. We had, as much as we wanted to eat, as the variety of things. So it wasn't like a lot of K rations for the troops out in the front line someplace. So
Pilots been really well treated, right?
Oh, yeah.
Always.
Oh, yeah. yeah. So a lot of people are kind of envious of the Air Force and the pilots because of our privileged living conditions.
Right.
But we did our duties best we could.
Any dangerous moment during your service in Korea?
Almost every mission is apprehensive, but I got to the point where I was so confident that I had no problem going down and doing my job. And sometimes I was a second lieutenant. We'd have other pilots that were full-time duty supply officers, but they were pilots. They'd have to fly from time to time. So there were times when I had a wingman that was a major, and they followed me down. I was the leader. So when you're a flight leader, you're a flight leader, no matter what their rank is. Like I said, it's almost no interaction with the Korean people.
Got it.
If there were some Koreans working on the air base, you would see them or something, but you didn't have time to visit with them and interrelate to them. So it was just that they were there and we were there, and they were doing their thing, we were doing our thing. So, well, there's one time I got a black eye. That's my major wound.
Huh.
I was flying this F-84. We were taking off, and we got up to maybe 15,000 feet or so. All of a sudden, the canopy just exploded.
Oh, really?
The whole thing went off
Why was
in
that?
pieces. Well, because they analyzed it, and it was kind of not a circular. It was elliptical, and so from time to time, the air pressure would expand it out and come down. So the flexing of it, I guess, weakened the plastic
Oh.
where it got destroyed. So they quickly modified that. They put strips reinforcing longitudinally and transverse. And so looked like you're looking out little windows all over the place, where before you had clear open view. So when that thing blew off, I lost my, you always had the visor, the piece that comes down, your oxygen mask is there. My oxygen mask was still there, so I could still talk to people. But the noise of that air going past was like a huge noise.
Thundering.
Yeah. So I had to abort the mission. I had a full load of 5-inch rockets, I think. And so I called my flight leader my problem. And so they went on with their mission. I went back to the base, and they have a place for that kind of emergency. So you go to the dump and dump your munitions, fly around a little while to lower your fuel load so you can land on that little strip. So I did all those things. I knew the procedures. So I landed and went in, and a piece of someplace hit me in the forehead area a little bit here. So I ended up with a black eye. But I didn't go forward with to get a Purple Heart for a black eye, so it's not on the official record anywhere. But that's my only wound. But on other missions later on in the war, close support, we'd come down, we'd wing over to come down, and I came back sometimes with a bullet hole through the top of my wing. As we're coming down, the bullet would come up that way. And other times there was a bullet that came in the front of the fuselage ahead of me. But it wasn't, you know, it was close to me, but it wasn't in my cockpit with me, and so I didn't get wounded from enemy fire.
When did you leave Korea?
In June of '51.
What were you feeling? What were you thinking when you were departing Korea?
Well, I was happy to be gone because I didn't have to face the enemy for another time. But see, after I had 100 combat missions, our squadron commander told us, says, you don't have to fly anymore, but we have missions we need to do, and our relief is not yet here. So it was all voluntary. So I stayed on. I said, well, I'll keep flying. And so, of course, then there's competition. Some pilots want to have the most missions. So one of our pilots got maybe 140, 145 missions. But I got 130. They said, that's enough. I said, that's fine with me. I don't mind. And so by that time, we had our relief pilots coming in. And so it was just a matter of time until we flew out of there then.
So what did you do after you come back from Korea?
Well, I came back and went back to Texas, and by that time we were just flying training flights and so forth. We flew a lot of missions out of Bergstrom up over Kansas, and we had interceptor flights on B-29s to train their gunners. We'd make pass after pass after pass while they shot cameras at us, so forth. So I did that a number of times. I don't know, must have been a dozen or 2 dozen times I went up on those missions. But I was young then and single. We had a lot of married pilots in our outfit from World War II, so there weren't too many of us that were single. And so we got all these other missions, and that was fine with me because we'd stay up there for a little while. I got TDY, so we'd stay up there and make a few extra bucks. So a lot of times in the Air Force, I was able to send my whole paycheck back to the bank in Dixon for savings because I could live off of my per diem, whatever was there. So I was very frugal through my whole life on everything. I had opportunity to go to school, so I went to Squadron Officer Training School at Maxwell Air Force Base, Alabama. So there was I don't know what was it, 8 weeks or 10 weeks, whatever it was. I stayed with the family there because they didn't have room on the base, and it's kind of interesting because the family I stayed with, they had a room there for people like me and paid a modest amount for the room rent. And they were with a religious group called the Primitive Baptists. And so that was new to me. So there's like hellfire and damnation. You go to the sermon and go on for hours, you know, talking about all the stuff they talk about. So that didn't really quite fit in with my background. But when I was a Protestant back in Iowa and Illinois, in the Grace Evangelical Church, we'd have I forget what they called it, Temperance Week or something. There'd be a guest preacher come in for a couple of weeks and speak every night on same type of thing, hellfire and damnation. If you don't live right, well, you're going to go the wrong way. So I was familiar with that sort of thing. They were very nice people. I learned a lot there. Went back to Texas and had an opportunity for another school, Air Intelligence Officer School. So I went up to Lowry Air Force Base, Denver, and went for a class up there for however long it was, a number of weeks. And part of that training there was survival training. So we went up in the mountains above, where's the Air Force Academy?
Colorado Springs, Colorado.
Yeah, Colorado Springs.
Yep.
We went down there, we went through a little bit of ground training, and we went up in the mountains with backpacks and to survive in the mountains. And of course, they didn't have a place for fighter pilots. It was mostly like long-range bombers, and they'd have a crew. So they'd assemble half a dozen of us together to go as a unit. So we went up there and learned how to survive in the mountains. So that was an interesting period of time. You have to evade the people, so you can't go on the roads. You'd be picked up and hauled back and start over again and interrogated and so forth. So that was an interesting period of time here. And so we lived off these little K rations, and you weren't allowed to bring along candy bars or other supplemental things. You're supposed to live off the land.
It was a survival training.
Survival training. And so the first night I was cold all night, because we were up there and you have a sleeping bag and you had your little parachute that was for a tent, you know. And so it was cold up there. And so after the first night, they had a lot of pine trees around. So I'd gather up big arms full of these pine needles, make a mattress, put my sleeping bag on top of that, because you sleep on the bare ground. Sleeping bag is right down against that frozen ground and you're freezing. So I slept good after that. It's like a mummy. You slip in this thing, pull the zipper up, and it's all around you all the while. It's just your face sticking out. I slept real good after that. But we got along, and then you come to the point where you have to cross the enemy lines or something. So I went down, and I tried to hide till I got down there, watched the patrols coming and going. I was kind of down in the snow there behind some bushes and things. I thought it was clear, so I went across the line.
When you left Korea in June of 1951,
Yeah.
did you have any hope about the future of Korea, that Korea could be developed like this today?
Oh, I had no idea it'd be like it is today. I had no idea, because there's so much. Well, it's kind of like Europe. You know, Germany today isn't like it was after World War II. You know, the big cities all bombed out. So it's just the amazing power of freedom that people have in Korea, South Korea, and in Taiwan and other places that are away from all that dictatorship business, you know. So it's just amazing to me what South Korea has done and is doing. I mean, produce automobiles. I mean, they're competitive with everybody in the world on everything. So it's hardworking, intelligent people. But my wife went to school with people from Korean ancestry. All the Korean ancestry people here were constantly trying to find ways and means to help their countrymen that was underneath Japanese control. And the Japanese army was terrible. I read something about the Japanese Navy, which picked up some survivors from some of our Navy ships that were sunk. They received much better treatment than the Bataan Death March when they surrendered in the Philippines there at the beginning of the war, and what the Japanese Army did. And what the Japanese Army did in any place that they controlled in the South Pacific or in China. Read a little bit about this Nanking massacre the Japanese did against China. So some of that's still a sore point between Japan and Korea and China. So the barbarism is innate in the Middle East right now, and it's part of human nature.
Have you been back to Korea?
No.
No? How do you know about all this developed aspect of the Korean society?
Well, National Geographic, the newspaper, the whole media, I'm aware of all these things. So I just try to keep up to date with what's going on all over the world.
So are you proud of your service during the war?
Well, I am, but in that my pride is that I did the best I could for my country and my fellow soldiers and airmen and all the rest of it, and trying to be a benefit to the Korean people too. And so I had all these idealistic motivations to do what I did, but at the same time, I have colleagues that were in service with me. They ended up in Vietnam and other places, and some of them ended up this way or that way in something else, you know. So the stories of John McCain and some of the others in their prisons in Hanoi for years, and I could have been there if I'd stayed in and got shot down. So I'm glad I left, because when I left, I had no idea there was going to be more wars. And when I left, it was pretty much a stalemate, but not quite, but it was headed that way. I know these things happen. I just don't need to have it right in front of my face. I don't need to have to relive it. This one mission, we'd been flying missions, sometimes early, sometimes late. So this one came in the late evening. It was almost dark, but not quite.
1951?
Yeah, I'm not sure what month it would be.
Mm-hmm.
But the enemy, Chinese, North Koreans, whoever they were, we came into this close support area, and we had a mission to check this one area out. And this was a few miles above our front lines. So our troops were behind us a little ways. We came down this one valley, and I couldn't believe my eyes. Coming out of the hills, big lines of troops coming down the road were tanks and trucks. Wow.
What happened?
Well, we came in to knock them out, and we did.
That's Chinese or North Korean?
Well, I don't know who was down there, but
Right.
the enemy. So anyway, we came down there. By that time, I had lots of experience. So I came down, and we had radar-controlled gun sights. It wasn't like the old War II kind. So we had ranging and set the thing on the target there. You know, a lot of these movies are so dishonest, because it shows
Yeah.
fighter planes coming down, all the bullets going along like that. Totally ineffective.
Right.
You might hit something, you might not. Well, that's not the way it was with us. You come down, you'd get that target right in the bullseye, squeeze it off, and you'd hit it. You didn't spray bullets all over the place.
Right.
Squeeze off a burst. Came down to this one truck, lined it up at the proper range, squeeze off a burst, and 650 caliber machine guns, and they were rapid fire. I don't know how many rounds per minute, but they were extremely effective when they're all focused in on one point. You just squeeze that off, and the whole thing blew up all over the place. So we went there, and after we got done with that, because they didn't have any aircraft fire against us, because they weren't prepared for us coming in. So we heard later on that our ground troops never met them. So we totally disrupted their operation, because they were going to come down and engage our troops that night. And so we had a very effective interdiction. So that was impressive to me, that we did something that was beneficial to our cause.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of times targets are hard to find. You find something, armed interdiction. We had some missions with our extra fuel tanks. We went clear up into the far northeast corner of Korea,
Mm-hmm.
right across the boundary there with the Soviet Union.